So, now for the hard bit. We need to be positive. We need to build a new future for ourselves. In the first 4 episodes, I've reviewed our current situation and come to the conclusion that the heart of the environmental crisis lies in Western culture and is focused on our need to respect the earth. And that has implications. It means that a few activists disrupting things will not, in the end, change the world as we need it to be changed. Nor will technologists, with all their inventiveness, change it either. Because if it's a cultural problem, it affects all of us. All of us are involved. And all of us need in some way to change. So, in this next series that I call Next Steps, I'll be exploring a pathway, a journey towards change. And it really is a journey that I myself am on and would not in any way feel like I'd arrived. And there's no simple sort of quick fix. We love to have our 5 things we must do, our life hack. But no. Let's relax, take our time, take a deep breath, and begin the journey of change. So, I'm going to call this episode Breaking Out of the Human Bubble. And there's a reason for that. When I say the words respect the earth, I wonder what that does to you. I think those words are actually rather difficult to hear. Respect the earth. And there's a reason why they're difficult to hear. And that has to do with where we are as human beings today. Many of us live in cities, very convenient, full of choice, efficient lives, but actually isolated. We spend most of our time indoors, comfortable, secure, and mentally. We go to a school which teaches us a few thousand years of pretty much entirely human history. And it's not surprising that we grow up to think the world is really about human beings. It's human beings that really count. And you could say we live in a human bubble. To some extent you could say, well, of course we do. We're human beings. Yeah, we relate to other human beings, don't we? Yes, we do. But this is something greater than that. This is the extent to which we think reality is circumscribed by human beings. To live in a human bubble is to think that the world is us. And around us is this thing we've called, quite strangely really, the environment. As if it's inert, not changing, something that will always be there. And that, of course, is far from the case. And what we have to do is break out of our human bubble. And how do we do that? So, 3 steps. The first I'd suggest is that we learn to encounter the wild around us. The other day when I went out for a walk in the early morning, I startled 2 deer. Wow! And then I saw a heron flying overhead to land on the lake. I heard a Chetty's warbler in the reeds. Some evenings when I'm going out, I'll come across a fox who'll look at me, just a glance, and then slink away. It's exciting. These are their own creatures. They're not owned by a human being like my dog is. They are their own thing. They live among us, but they're wild. I remember recently we watched a film made by wildlife photographer Martin Dawn during lockdown in his garden here in Bristol, called My Garden of 1,000 Bees. And with his professional cameras, he was able to capture the world of the bees in his garden. And he also even got to know them individually, the Nicky bee with a little nick out of its wing, and he would work out where they foraged, and he got to know them in their wildness. And you could see that he was changed by that process. A wonderful film, I recommend it. So, to encounter the wild is a special thing. As I walk about this neighbourhood, often people come out to me and say, I saw a kingfisher in the middle pond, or a little egret over there. Or someone else came one day and said, I saw otters playing around my garden pond, I've got them on camera. And that was difficult to believe, but it was actually true. And these things sort of, they shock us. They excite us in a very good way as we encounter the wild around us. And the next step is to experience the power of the earth. I went on holiday a few months back in October, during the time when Storm Ciarán, as we humanly call these things, swept across the south coast. I remember the day before, there were warnings, and there were some great ships moored in Tor Bay to take shelter. I remember just before the storm, there was a sailing yacht, just going across the horizon, sort of scurrying away into harbour. And then the wind rose, and the sea became bigger and bigger, and then it was crashing across the front at Teignmouth. We were watching one story up in a house just 20 yards away from the estuary of the River Tyne, and it was an extraordinary sight. Huge waves crashing over the promenade. A few miles further along the south coast, a car was washed off into the sea. And we were sort of watching, and the power of the thing just quietened us. It was awe-inspiring. I remember the next morning, the storm was still raging, and we went up into a little wood at the top of Sheldon, and the trees were bent right over, in howling as the wind howled through them. We didn't actually go into the wood that day. Didn't look wise to me, although in fact all the trees stood. But the power of the earth is something else for us to experience, that takes us out of ourselves, that breaks our bubble, and helps us realise we're subject to something greater than ourselves. It might be, out in the cold, leaning into the driving snow, or by a rushing water, or it could be just being the sheer heat of a summer's day. but whatever it is, the power of the earth, I think has the capacity to break our human bubble. And the third thing I'd suggest, the third step that we might like to engage with is making connections. Making connections between these things. I mean, like I've mentioned, foxes. We have foxes living around here. Well, how do we live well with foxes? What does it mean? What should we do? Should we feed them? Or does that make them into our pets? How do we respect them as foxes? It's an interesting question. It's a difficult question. What do we do when we see a fox suffering from mange? Or, more prosaically really, those people who keep fish in their ponds and the heron comes, how do we feel about that? And what do we do? Or the badgers. Your area might have badgers. And the government wants to cull them. And the farmers support that process. And we go, whoa, how do we deal with this? Well, these connections, it might prove complicated and it might be difficult, but actually it's a very important conversation to have. How do we live well with the wild? How do we respect the wild? Because part of that is respecting the earth. So there we are. 3 first steps. Encountering the wild, experiencing the power of the earth, and beginning to make connections between them all. How we begin to break out of our human bubble. Okay, next time we'll have a look at science, not in a boring way, but science as revelation. Science of the last 50 years that has taught us about the earth and which should change the way we think about it. Hope you've enjoyed that. See you soon.